Christopher Mertz is a Florida-based program management professional, former school principal, and community advocate. He is known for building structured systems, strengthening school performance, and supporting parents and young men through FatherFigure Advocates, LLC. The morning routine that becomes a method. On many mornings in Florida, Christopher Mertz moves through a familiar sequence. The day starts quietly, shaped by prayer and scripture. There is an insistence on rhythm before reaction. Then the day becomes more public, turning toward family routines and the work that follows. That order matters because it shows up elsewhere. It shows up in how he runs meetings, how he sets expectations, and how he thinks about progress. Across roles in education leadership and program management, his approach keeps circling back to the same idea: structure first, then results. It is an approach that reads less like a slogan and more like a habit. Not an abstract philosophy, but a daily posture. And it helps explain why his career has focused on environments where small decisions, repeated, become outcomes that others can measure. A career built inside the machinery of schools. Mertz has spent 19 years in education across 3 school districts, building teams and improving systems. His work sits in the operational middle of schooling, where the work is part instruction, part discipline systems, part family communication, and part logistics. It is where policies become lived experience for staff, students, and parents. At Discovery Elementary in Deltona, Florida, he served as principal from 2024 to September 2025. During that time, the school's grade increased by 9 percentage points, moving from 43% to 52%, described as the highest score in the previous 11 years. The work touched all 8 Florida Department of Education accountability categories, with gains that included 3rd grade ELA proficiency rising 11%, overall ELA proficiency rising 8%, math proficiency rising 9%, and science rising 13%. Learning gains rose as well, including ELA learning gains increasing 8% and math learning gains increasing 10%. Lowest quartile gains also rose, with ELA lowest quartile learning gains increasing 7% and math lowest quartile learning gains increasing 11%. A school grade is not a single lever. It is a composite of attendance patterns, instructional consistency, intervention quality, and school climate. In that sense, the numbers point to a broader operational shift. His role included managing a $4 million budget and a $182,000 Title I budget, supervising 90 employees and 675 students in a Title I community, and helping expand stakeholder communication through a 59% growth in social media engagement. In roles before that, he held assistant principal responsibilities at Milwee Middle School in Longwood from 2023 to 2024 and at South Seminole Academy in Castleberry from 2018 to 2023. At Milwee, his scope included a pre-engineering magnet program recognized as a Magnet School of Excellence, leading essay programming with 4 self-contained units and 300-plus essay students, and overseeing IEPs, 504s, and EPs, alongside athletics and electives. At South Seminole Academy, his leadership focused heavily on mathematics and support services. Over that span, math learning gains rose 22 percentage points, from 42% to 64%. Math lowest quartile learning gains rose 29 percentage points, from 29% to 58%. Acceleration proficiency for algebra and geometry rose from 77% to 84%. Math learning gains for students with disabilities rose 29 percentage points, from 23% to 52%. The school also received a Closing the Gap Achievement Award in 2022 and was certified as a National Magnet Demonstration School and Magnet School of Excellence. In the texture of these roles, a pattern emerges. Mertz tends to take on the parts of the system that are hardest to stabilize: special education, testing, discipline supports, transition processes, and the infrastructure that staff rely on when the day goes sideways. The discipline side of leadership. Before he was a principal and assistant principal, Mertz worked in roles that demanded direct engagement with behavior, consequences, and student support. He served as an administrative dean at multiple schools, often as a disciplinary dean for 7th grade. At Chain of Lakes Middle School in Orlando from 2013 to 2014, the total number of students suspended fell by 34.8%, lowering the suspension rate to 9.07%. He also created an intervention group for males with the highest number of referrals and lowered the suspension rate for that group by 48%. At Apopka Middle School from 2012 to 2013, the total number of students suspended fell by 18.6%, lowering the suspension rate to 14.7%, and he created a targeted intervention group for challenging female students that reduced suspension days by 44%. These are not purely punitive statistics. They suggest the kind of work that happens when a school shifts from reacting to behavior to building systems that reduce friction. His certifications and training point in the same direction: restorative practices, youth mental health, professional crisis management, threat management training, and facilitative leadership. The work of reducing suspensions requires consistency. It requires adults making aligned decisions, clear expectations, and credible follow-through. It also requires relationships strong enough to keep a student connected to school rather than pushed out of it. Mertz's resume reads like someone who has spent years living inside that tension, trying to lower the temperature while still keeping standards intact. The long arc from classroom teacher. From 2006 to 2012, Mertz taught algebra and mathematics at Walker Middle School in Orlando. He taught grades 6 and 8, including ESOL sheltered programs, standard and advanced tracks, and honors. He served as math department chair and led math PLC work. His student learning gains were consistently over 90% of the total population, and he administered a tutoring program that produced 72% learning gains in reading and 83% learning gains in math, serving 160 students and 15 teachers. There is a particular kind of leader who starts in the classroom and never stops thinking like a teacher, even when the title changes. You see it in how they talk about professional development, coaching, and feedback loops. His earlier roles included building calendars for instructional focus, creating MTSS packets by Florida standards, and delivering professional development on differentiated instruction in the Marzano framework. Even later, in administration, his work frequently sits at the intersection of systems and people, observing teachers, giving actionable feedback, building schedules, and creating intake and outtake processes for students. In alternative education settings, he served as acting assistant principal at Positive Pathways Transition Center from 2014 to 2016, building systems to transition students back to their zoned schools successfully and meeting district leadership demands with data presentations. A pivot into program management. In 2025, Mertz moved into a program management role at University Instructors in Deltona, Florida, serving as a program manager and Google account specialist. His responsibilities include overseeing Google accounts for 900+ employees and supervising instructors and program assistants across multiple districts and states. It is a different terrain from a school campus, but it still lives in the same category of work: building an operational backbone so other people can do their jobs. In a school, the backbone is schedules, safety protocols, intervention cycles, and communication routines. In a program environment, it becomes access, accounts, workflow, and consistency across locations. This shift also reflects a career that has never been confined to one narrow lane. Education leadership requires a kind of generalist competence. The work is part strategy, part logistics, part communication, part crisis management. Program management, at its best, asks for the same skill set. FatherFigure Advocates and the Parents' View. Mertz is also the founder of FatherFigure Advocates, LLC, a Florida-based venture dedicated to empowering parents and mentoring young men, with an emphasis on helping families navigate the public school system and supporting youth within and beyond it. The services described include parent advocacy and consulting, student mentoring for schools and families, transition support between educational stages, and workshops for schools and family groups on educational rights and character development. It is the kind of work that often emerges when someone has spent years on the inside of a system and begins to see it from the outside. Parents often experience schools through moments of stress, a disciplinary incident, a learning struggle, a meeting about services, a confusing policy, a child who is falling behind, or a transition that feels like a cliff. A former principal who knows the language, the timelines, and the levers can translate that complexity into steps a family can actually follow. The venture is also framed around mentoring young men with an emphasis on discipline, integrity, and purpose. That focus aligns with themes that show up repeatedly across the biographical materials shared about him: faith, family, routine, and physical fitness as a stabilizing practice. Reputation as an everyday practice. In the materials connected to FatherFigure Advocates, Mertz places weight on reputation, perception, and image, linking them to choices and consistency. In his world, reputation is not branding. It is behavior that holds up under pressure. That idea fits with the way he has worked inside schools. When a school improves, it is rarely because of a single dramatic change. It is usually because 1,000 small commitments become predictable. Teachers align instruction, interventions start on time, behavior systems are consistent, parents receive clearer communication, data is used without becoming a weapon, and students experience a steadier day. Mertz's career includes plenty of work that only becomes visible when it is missing. The schedule that prevents chaos, the discipline framework that lowers suspensions, the tutoring program that catches students before they fall too far, and the systems that help a school respond to the needs of students with disabilities. It is easy to talk about leadership in grand terms. His background points toward leadership as maintenance, accountability, and repeatable routines. Setbacks, humility, and the long view. One thread that appears across his bios is the presence of a professional setback, described as a defining job loss that became a turning point for resilience and humility. The way it is described does not center drama. It centers recalibration, the idea that failure can become preparation for a stronger return, if the response is disciplined rather than reactive. In education, setbacks are constant. A new policy shifts expectations mid-year. A cohort enters with different needs. A staff change disrupts momentum. A community crisis affects attendance, behavior, and morale. A leader who stays steady through those changes often relies on internal routines, personal supports, and a willingness to keep learning. In the materials provided, Mertz is described as someone who values mentors and networks and treats humility and learning as career strategy, not just personal virtue. Movement, focus, and the body as reset. Another consistent theme is physical fitness as a tool for mental clarity and focus. In his bios, he is described as seeing exercise as central to mental health and cognitive focus, and as someone who uses physical activity to reset when overwhelmed. Rather than framing this as performance or aesthetics, it reads as regulation. In high-responsibility roles, especially in schools, leaders carry a constant load of other people's stress. A body-based practice can be a way to drain that pressure so decisions stay clean. This belief also connects to a forward-looking idea he has explored: a private school model designed to integrate movement throughout the academic day to support focus, creativity, and learning. It is a concept that sits at the intersection of discipline and compassion. It suggests an environment built not only around standards, but also around how children actually regulate attention and energy. Family as a shaping force. Mertz is described as a dedicated father who finds meaning in morning routines with his daughter and family evenings that keep him grounded. One bio mentions cooking family dinners and watching the film Lilo and Stitch, connecting to the value of ohana, framed as family meaning no one gets left behind. In his public work, that idea appears again in a different form. Parent advocacy is, in many ways, the practical version of not leaving people behind. Mentoring young men is another. Both are forms of staying with someone when things get complicated. In schools, the students who struggle most often come from households navigating multiple pressures at once. A leader who stays close to the family dimension of education tends to treat academic performance as part of a wider ecosystem: routines, stability, accountability, and consistent adult presence. The family thread does not replace the data. It gives the data a purpose. The leadership style underneath the roles across job titles. Mertz's responsibilities repeatedly include the same kinds of work: training staff, building schedules, monitoring progress, leading professional development, increasing communication, and using data to raise performance. There are also repeated assignments to roles that require trust: Title X coordinator, testing coordinator, threat team leadership, and oversight of special education processes like IEPs and 504s. These are roles where mistakes are costly and where the adult in charge has to be calm, precise, and consistent. His certifications reinforce that picture. They point to someone trained for crisis, for facilitation, for restorative practices, and for safety-oriented decision-making. In a school setting, this kind of leader is often the one who has to keep the building steady while everything else changes. That steadiness can look quiet from the outside. From the inside, it can be the difference between a staff that trusts the system and a staff that improvises its way through the day. Why Christopher Mertz matters now. The broader environment around families and schools continues to put pressure on parents, students, and educators. The needs of students vary widely, especially for families navigating special education services, disciplinary processes, or major transitions between school levels. In that climate, the value of clear systems rises. Christopher Mertz's work sits in that space between ideals and implementation. His education leadership record shows a focus on measurable improvement, from school accountability gains to substantial reductions in suspension rates, alongside the operational responsibilities of budgeting, staffing, and communication. His shift into program management shows the same preference for scalable infrastructure. And FatherFigure Advocates extends his experience into a community-facing role that centers parents and young men who need guidance that is both practical and consistent. Taken together, the through line is not charisma or reinvention. It is durability, a steady emphasis on routines, discipline, and follow-through, paired with a view of family as the unit that holds everything else together. In Florida, that combination places him in a role that bridges two worlds: the internal mechanics of education systems and the lived experience of the people who rely on them.